On the morning of March 6, 1991, two flatbed trucks rolled through the western edge of Whitfield County, Georgia, carrying what everyone else considered garbage. They rumbled past bare winter orchards, crossed the old Conasauga River Bridge, and stopped beside an empty tobacco barn just outside the small town of Varnell. The trucks tipped their beds one after another. Thousands of broken wooden apple crates crashed into the frosted dirt like a landslide. Splintered poplar, cracked cedar slats, twisted wire mesh, rusted staples. By noon, the pile stood nearly 14 feet high. The orchard manager signed a single receipt. The drivers climbed back into their cabs, and they left. Standing beside that mountain of broken wood was Ruth Calloway, 34 years old, widowed for almost 3 years, raising a son and a daughter on 61 inherited acres that barely covered the feed bills. She didn't flinch. She simply watched. Then she smiled. Nobody understood why. Not the drivers, not the neighbors slowing along Poplar Springs Road, and certainly not Nathan Pierce, operations director of Blue Ridge Orchard Supply, who had personally approved dumping every last crate there because hauling them to the county landfill would have cost the company nearly $19,000. To Nathan, they were worthless. To Ruth, they looked like the beginning of something. Let me tell you about Ruth Calloway. She had never planned to become a farmer. She grew up in Chattanooga, worked summers in a hardware store, and married Thomas Calloway, a quiet man whose family had grown apples and peaches in Whitfield County since before the Depression. Thomas wasn't wealthy, neither was the farm, but together they made enough selling fruit, cider, and preserves through roadside stands and the Saturday market in Dalton. Everything changed on June 14, 1988. Thomas suffered a fatal heart attack while repairing the chain on their old fruit press. He was only 39 years old. The bank expected Ruth to sell. Most neighbors expected the same. Instead, she buried her husband on a hot Thursday afternoon, returned home before sunset, changed into work boots still stained with orchard dust, and finished picking the remaining rows of early peaches by lantern light. Some people mistook quiet for weakness. Ruth never corrected them. She simply kept working. The only machine Thomas had left behind was a 1952 Ford 8N tractor, purchased new by his father in February 1952 from a Ford dealer in Dalton for $1,265. The tractor produced approximately 24 horsepower from its 4-cylinder engine and weighed just over 3,400 pounds without ballast. By modern standards, it was outdated. Its faded gray paint had turned nearly white in places. The seat springs squeaked. The clutch pedal showed decades of polished steel where boots had worn away the paint. But every Saturday morning, Ruth checked the engine oil herself. Every autumn, she changed every fluid. Every winter, she greased each fitting by hand. The Ford never complained. Neither did she. By 1991, however, the farm faced another problem. Fruit prices had fallen, fuel costs had climbed, interest rates remained painfully high after years of hard farming in the region. Ruth needed another source of income. She just hadn't found it yet, until the crates arrived. Word spread quickly through Whitfield County. Orchard dumped their junk on the widow's place. People stopped to stare. Teenagers climbed the pile after school. Someone even nailed a crooked sign onto the stack that read, "Free Firewood." Ruth removed the sign before sunset, not because she was angry, because she had different plans. 3 days later, Nathan Pierce drove out to inspect the site. He wore polished loafers that immediately sank into the muddy gravel. He frowned at the crates, then at Ruth. "You planning to burn all this?" "No." "Sell it?" "No." He looked genuinely confused. "What exactly are you going to do with it?" Ruth brushed sawdust from her gloves. "I'm still listening." Nathan laughed politely. "You can't listen to broken wood." She looked toward the enormous pile. "I think you can." Nathan shook his head. "You know what I hear?"
She waited. "I hear termites." He smiled at his own joke. Ruth smiled too. Neither said another word. By the following week, she had borrowed an old trailer from her neighbor Owen Mercer, sharpened every handsaw she owned, and parked the Ford 8N beside the mountain of crates. Every morning at 6, every evening until dark, she dismantled them. Not smashed, not chopped, carefully, one board at a time. Each usable plank went into one stack, corner braces into another, wire mesh into barrels, rusted staples into buckets. Nothing useful was wasted. The neighbors couldn't understand it. It counted nearly 6,700 damaged crates delivered over 3 days. Even if half the wood could be saved, the work would take months. Ruth never hurried. She believed hurried hands made expensive mistakes. By early April, another visitor arrived. Adam Weller, 29 years old, regional agricultural lending officer, fresh business degree, new pickup truck, pressed shirt, perfect confidence. The county bank had assigned him to review struggling farms before renewing operating loans. Ruth's farm sat high on his list. Adam walked around the property with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. He noted peeling paint, old fencing, a weathered barn, and an aging tractor. Then he saw Ruth sorting broken crate boards. He actually stopped writing. "What are you building?" "I haven't started building yet." He frowned. "Then why are you taking them apart?" "So they'll fit." "Fit what?" "You'll see." Adam looked around the yard. "I don't see anything." Ruth nodded. "Exactly." He scribbled another note. From his perspective, everything about the farm confirmed the numbers on his paperwork. Declining revenue, old equipment, no expansion, no obvious business plan, just a widow spending hundreds of hours taking apart trash.
The following Saturday, several local farmers gathered outside Ledford's feed store in Varnell. Coffee steamed from foam cups, rain clouds drifted overhead. Adam happened to be there, so did Nathan Pierce. Someone asked how the Calloway farm was doing. Adam chuckled before answering. Nathan joined in. Soon half the group was laughing. "Crate Queen," one man joked. "She's opening the world's smallest junkyard," another added. Even Nathan slapped his knee. "You should have seen her," he said loudly, "standing there like those busted crates were stacks of gold." The laughter rolled across the parking lot. At that exact moment, Ruth pulled into the feed store driving the old Ford 8N with an empty trailer behind it. The engine settled into its slow, familiar rumble. Every conversation stopped. Nathan smiled, then laughed again, only louder this time, and everyone else followed. The laughter echoed across the gravel parking lot long after the Ford rolled to a stop. Ruth climbed down slowly, not embarrassed, not angry. She brushed a little dust from her denim jacket, adjusted one worn leather glove, and walked toward the feed counter as though she hadn't heard a single word. Nathan folded his arms. Adam smirked. One of the younger farmers nudged another with his elbow. "Better ask her if she's selling firewood." More laughter. Ruth picked up 2 sacks of clover seed, a box of galvanized screws, and a replacement bearing for the tractor's hay wagon. She placed them on the counter. Nathan couldn't resist. "So, Ruth," he called across the store, loud enough for everyone to hear, "how many broken boxes does it take to build a fortune?" The room grew quiet. Every eye settled on her. She turned. Her weathered hands rested lightly on the feed counter. "I don't know." Nathan grinned. "Thought you had a plan." "I do." "Then tell us." Ruth smiled, calm as ever. "I'd rather show you." Someone chuckled. Nathan laughed again, this time throwing his head back. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of someone completely certain he already knew the ending. Adam joined him. Even the cashier smiled awkwardly. Ruth simply paid for her supplies, thanked the cashier, climbed back onto the old Ford 8N, and drove away without another word. The steady rhythm of the four-cylinder engine slowly drowned out the laughter behind her. Let me tell you about that tractor. The 1952 Ford 8N had already lived 3 working lives before Ruth became its caretaker. Thomas's father, Walter Calloway, bought it new in February 1952 after harvesting one of the best peach crops the family had ever seen. He traded in an old mule team and nearly every dollar he had saved. Neighbors called him reckless. The Ford changed everything. It pulled loaded wagons through the orchard rows, powered a belt-driven cider press, hauled water during drought years, and cleared fallen limbs after every storm. Every dent carried a memory. The scrape along the left fender came from a narrow gate in 1961. The chipped steering wheel happened during storm cleanup in 1974. The polished clutch pedal had been worn smooth by 3 generations of Callaway boots. Machines like that weren't simply owned, they were inherited. Back at the farm, Ruth continued dismantling crates from sunrise until dusk. She wasn't collecting lumber, she was sorting dimensions: 20-inch slats, 26-inch side rails, corner blocks, wire hinges. Every piece went into carefully measured piles. By late April, the mountain looked noticeably smaller. The neighbors assumed she had finally started burning it. She hadn't burned a single board. One afternoon, her 11-year-old daughter, Nora, walked beside her carrying a notebook. "Mom?" "Yes." "How do you remember where everything goes?" Ruth smiled. "I don't." Nora looked confused. "I write it down." She opened the notebook. Every stack had a number, every board had a measurement, every usable piece had a future purpose. Nothing was random. Everything belonged somewhere. Have you ever owned something everyone else called worthless? Not because it truly lacked value, but because nobody else had the patience to see what it could become. Sometimes the difference between junk and opportunity isn't the object itself, it's the person looking at it. By early May, Ruth borrowed an old radial arm saw from Owen Mercer. The motor screamed louder than it cut. She rebuilt the fence around the work area using reclaimed posts. She built measuring tables from salvaged beams. Then, for the first time, the stacks of wood began disappearing almost as quickly as she dismantled them. Nobody knew where they were going. Adam Weller noticed something unusual during his monthly loan inspection. There were tire tracks, lots of them. Not tractor tracks, pickup trucks, small trailers, cars from towns outside Whitfield County. He checked his paperwork. The farm still reported almost no crop income, yet visitors kept arriving. He knocked on Ruth's back door. She answered, wearing safety glasses covered with sawdust. "I won't keep you long," Adam said. "What can I help you with?" "I've seen people coming here." "Yes? What are they buying?" Ruth looked toward the old tobacco barn. "They're ordering." "Ordering what?" "You'll know soon." Adam sighed. "You really enjoy speaking in riddles." "No, I'm just not finished." "I don't understand you." "You don't have to." Adam left more puzzled than when he arrived. That same evening, Nathan Pierce attended a business dinner in Dalton. During casual conversation, someone mentioned hearing about increased weekend traffic near the Callaway property. Nathan laughed. "I dumped almost 7,000 broken crates there." "Why? Cheapest place to leave them. What if she's selling the wood?" Nathan shook his head. "You've never seen those crates. They were garbage." Another businessman raised an eyebrow. "Still, people don't usually drive 30 miles to buy garbage." For the first time in weeks, Nathan stopped smiling. The following Saturday morning, he drove back to the farm. This time, he parked outside the old tobacco barn instead of beside the crate pile. The mountain was nearly gone. In its place stood rows of neatly stacked lumber sorted with military precision. Nathan frowned. He stepped closer. Every board had been trimmed, every staple removed, every edge sanded. Inside the barn, he heard hammers, saws, voices. He pushed the door open, then froze. 5 local women worked around long tables, assembling beautifully crafted raised garden bed kits. Each kit contained perfectly matched boards, pre-drilled holes, galvanized hardware, simple printed instructions. Children stacked finished boxes near the loading door. Nora sealed each package with twine. Ruth looked up. "Morning, Nathan." He stared. "What is all this?" "The crates." "No, I mean this." Ruth picked up one finished kit. "People in Dalton want to grow vegetables." "So? Most don't own farms." She placed the box into a customer's pickup. "They own backyards." Another truck pulled in, then another. Each driver carried a receipt. Each order had already been paid. "Who's buying these?" Ruth answered simply, "Families." One customer smiled. "We've been waiting 5 weeks." Another laughed. "My husband wanted 2. A third leaned out his truck window. "If you make larger ones next month, put us on the list." Nathan blinked. "The list?" Ruth nodded. "We're booked through July." His expression changed, slowly, quietly. The confidence that had carried him for months began slipping away. He looked toward the shrinking stacks of reclaimed lumber, then toward the line of waiting customers stretching down the gravel lane. And for the first time since those trucks dumped their load in March, Nathan realized the most valuable thing the orchard had thrown away had never been the wood. It was the opportunity he had been too certain to see. Nathan stood beside his pickup long after the last customer pulled away. The gravel lane became quiet again. Only the steady tapping of hammers drifted from the old tobacco barn. For several minutes he said nothing. Then he walked back inside. Ruth was tightening the final screw on another raised garden bed. Nora checked measurements while her younger brother Jesse stacked bundles of reclaimed boards against the wall. Nathan cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Ruth looked up. "For what?" "For laughing." She smiled gently. "You weren't the only one." "No, I suppose I wasn't." Nathan studied the neat rows of finished kits. "I really thought you were wasting your time." "I know. You never got angry." "There wasn't much point." He nodded slowly. "No, there wasn't." Before leaving, Nathan asked one more question. "How many have you sold?" Ruth reached for her order ledger. "As of this morning, 361. Nathan blinked. "Already?" "And another 150 people are waiting." He looked at the pages again to make sure he had heard correctly. Every order included a customer's name, address, deposit paid, delivery date. Some buyers came from Dalton, others drove from Chattanooga. A few even came from Calhoun. The waiting list stretched across 5 handwritten pages. Nathan walked back to his truck in complete silence. The woman he had laughed at in front of an entire feed store now had more customers than his own company's seasonal supply division.
That realization stayed with him all weekend. On Monday morning, he requested copies of the company's disposal records. Over the previous 5 years, Blue Ridge Orchard Supply had discarded nearly 48,000 wooden crates. Most had gone straight to landfills. The disposal fees alone totaled more than $140,000. Nathan stared at the numbers. He couldn't stop thinking about Ruth. She hadn't seen trash, she had seen inventory. Let me tell you about old crate lumber. Most orchards during the 1950s through 1970s used hardwood or cedar slats because they had to survive repeated loading, moisture, and rough handling. Even damaged crates often contained 70 to 80% usable wood. Pull the staples carefully, trim cracked ends, and suddenly you have seasoned lumber that has already finished shrinking over years of use. That makes it remarkably stable for outdoor projects. Modern pallet wood often twists after putting. Properly reclaimed crate lumber usually doesn't. Farmers knew that. Companies often forgot. That was exactly what Ruth understood. She wasn't recycling, she was recovering quality that someone else had already paid to produce. By June 1991, the old tobacco barn had transformed completely. The broken windows were repaired, workbench after workbench filled the building. Owen Mercer volunteered every Tuesday. 2 retired carpenters from Varnell offered to help on weekends. Local high school students earned summer wages sanding boards and packing hardware. Nobody called it the junkyard anymore. People started calling it Callaway Garden Works. Adam Lawson returned during his quarterly loan review carrying the same clipboard. Only this time, nothing looked familiar. Customers filled the parking area, a delivery truck waited beside the loading dock, fresh stacks of reclaimed lumber lined the barn. He found Ruth checking measurements with a framing square. "I think I owe you an apology, too," he admitted. She smiled. "It seems to be a popular sentence lately." Adam laughed quietly. "I deserved that." He closed his clipboard. "I recommended the bank deny your expansion loan." "I know." He looked surprised. "I built it afterward."
Adam shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this." Ruth handed him a finished planter box. "Most people don't." He turned it over in his hands. Perfect joints, clean edges, solid construction, no warped boards. They've already done all their shrinking. "You planned that." "I counted on it." Ruth laughed softly. "I told you, I was listening to the wood." Have you ever known you were right while everyone around you insisted you were wrong? Not because you had better luck, because you'd quietly done the work they never noticed. Those moments rarely feel satisfying at first. Mostly they feel lonely, until the results begin speaking louder than explanations ever could. By July, the waiting list reached nearly 8 months. Local newspapers noticed. The Chattanooga paper ran a weekend feature about a widow turning orchard waste into handcrafted garden products. Orders doubled within 2 weeks. Phone calls arrived faster than Ruth could answer them. Nora started keeping a second ledger just for future customers. One afternoon, a representative from a chain of home improvement stores visited the farm. He admired the products, then made an offer. "We'd like 4,000 units a year." Ruth thanked him, then politely declined. Owen nearly dropped his hammer. After the visitor left, he stared at her. "Ruth, that was the biggest order you've ever seen." "I know. So why refuse it?" She looked around the barn. "What happens if I spend every day chasing one customer?" Owen thought for a moment. "You lose everyone else." She nodded. "And I'd stop building a community." Late that August, Nathan returned again, only this time he wasn't wearing polished loafers. He wore old work boots. He carried rolled-up orchard blueprints beneath one arm. "I have a proposal," he said. Ruth invited him inside. He spread the drawings across the workbench. "Our company is replacing another storage building next spring." She listened. "We'll have thousands more damaged crates." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "I remember." Nathan smiled. "This time, I'd like to sell them to you instead of paying someone to dump them." Ruth studied the plans. "What price?" Nathan named a figure far below market lumber value. She looked at him carefully. "You've changed." "I hope so." I laughed because I thought experience belonged to people with newer buildings and bigger offices. He glanced around the workshop. I was wrong. Ruth extended her hand. He shook it firmly. The deal was made. Neither realized someone had been standing quietly outside the open barn door. Adam Weller had heard every word, and what he decided to do the very next morning would change far more than Ruth's farm. It would reshape how an entire county viewed forgotten things. The next morning, September 3rd, 1991, Adam arrived at the county bank before anyone else. The building was still quiet. The lobby lights had not yet been switched on. He carried Ruth Calloway's loan file under one arm and a yellow legal pad under the other.
For almost an hour, he rewrote every recommendation he had made about her farm. Months earlier, he had described the operation as high risk, limited growth potential, aging equipment, insufficient collateral. Now, he crossed out every line. In its place, he wrote something entirely different. Demonstrated profitability through innovative material recovery. Proven customer demand exceeding current production capacity. Recommend immediate approval for expansion financing. When the senior loan committee met later that morning, Adam did something few bankers enjoy doing. He admitted he had been wrong, not partially wrong, completely wrong. One committee member asked, "What changed?" Adam smiled. "I finally stopped looking at her balance sheet." "What did you start looking at?" "The waiting list." The loan was approved unanimously. Ruth never celebrated. She simply drove the old 1952 Ford 8N home from town, parked it beside the barn, and went back to work before lunch. That was who she was. The expansion happened slowly, exactly the way she preferred. She never built a giant factory, she never chased national retailers. Instead, she added another workshop beside the original barn, hired 5 more local workers, and trained every one of them the same way Thomas had once taught her. Measure twice, waste nothing, leave every board better than you found it.
By the spring of 1992, Callaway Garden Works employed 12 people from Whitfield County. Some were retired farmers, some were young parents looking for flexible hours. One was a former mill worker who hadn't held steady work in nearly 4 years. Ruth never asked for impressive resumes. She looked at hands that wanted honest work. The waiting list remained. Sometimes 3 months, sometimes nearly a year. Customers didn't seem to mind. They weren't buying inexpensive garden beds. They were buying something built with patience, and people could feel the difference. Let me tell you about Nathan Pierce. Most stories would have ended with him walking away embarrassed. Life rarely works that way. Over the following years, Nathan completely redesigned Blue Ridge Orchard Supply's disposal system. Instead of paying landfill fees, the company partnered with local schools, woodworking clubs, family farms, and small businesses to reclaim damaged crates. Waste dropped dramatically, operating costs fell, other orchards copied the idea. Whenever someone praised Nathan for the innovation, he always corrected them. "It wasn't my idea." Whose was it? A widow with an old tractor. He never failed to say her name, Ruth Calloway. That mattered to him. Adam Weller changed too. He became known throughout North Georgia as the banker who spent more time walking farms than reading reports. When younger loan officers asked why he always insisted on visiting every property personally, he answered with the same sentence. "Paper tells you what happened. The land tells you what's about to happen." Years later, many of those younger bankers repeated his advice without realizing where it had come from. The old Ford 8N continued working through every season. Its engine still carried the familiar slow rhythm that Thomas loved. Every winter, Ruth drained the coolant. Every spring, she adjusted the valves. Every autumn, she greased every fitting until fresh grease pushed through the bearings. Visitors often asked why she didn't replace it with something newer. She would rest one hand on the faded hood. This one still remembers the orchard. Around 2001, a collector offered $14,000 for the tractor. It was beautifully restored by then, though Ruth had insisted the dents remain. He couldn't understand why. They lower the value. Ruth smiled. No, they explain it. The tractor never left the farm. Its faded gray paint carried decades of harvests. Its worn seat had held 3 generations. Its engine had never forgotten how to work. In 2006, Nora returned after earning a business degree from the University of Georgia. People assumed she would modernize everything. Instead, she expanded carefully. An order system was added, then mail catalogs. Years later, a simple website. The waiting list remained.
Not because production stayed slow, because quality never became negotiable. Ruth often told new employees something they never forgot. Fast work fills trucks. Careful work fills calendars. By 2013, nearly every broken crate from Blue Ridge Orchard Supply found a second life before reaching a landfill. Schools used the lumber. Community gardens used it. Families built backyard vegetable beds across Georgia. Thousands of people grew tomatoes, peppers, beans, and herbs inside wood that had once been dismissed as worthless. Ruth rarely spoke at public events. She declined most interviews. She preferred working beside her employees. Visitors usually found her sweeping the floor or tightening loose bolts on old equipment rather than standing behind a podium. On an unusually warm afternoon in November 2019, Ruth parked the Ford 8N inside the original tobacco barn after finishing the fall cleanup. She shut off the engine. The familiar rumble faded into silence. She rested her hand on the steering wheel for a long moment. Then she walked toward the house where Nora and her grandchildren were preparing supper. She passed away peacefully in her sleep 4 months later at the age of 62. The funeral filled the little church outside Varnell. Farmers, teachers, mill workers, bankers, customers, children who had grown vegetables in her handcrafted garden beds years earlier. Even Nathan Pierce stood quietly near the back, holding his hat against his chest. Nobody remembered the day he laughed. They remembered the day he learned. Today, the Ford 8N still starts on the first or second pull. It appears every autumn during the local harvest festival, driven by one of Ruth's grandchildren. The dents remain, the paint remains, faded. The engine still sounds exactly the way Thomas remembered. And the original order ledger, the one Nora carried as an 11-year-old while her mother sorted broken crate boards, is displayed inside the workshop office, open to the first page. Customer number 1, paid in full, delivered on time.
Some things become valuable only after someone refuses to believe everyone else's definition of worthless. What is the significant educational value in this story? It teaches that patience and quiet, consistent effort often outperform quick judgment and mockery. It shows that resourcefulness and seeing hidden value in discarded things can build real, lasting, community-based success. And it demonstrates that admitting you were wrong and changing course because of it is a form of strength, not weakness.